to WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. My name is Brian Chai. I am the Deputy Managing Editor of Features here at the Western Journal. Today I have my compatriots, Andrew Shawshaw to my left, and Michael Austin to my right. We got a lot of big stuff to get to today, so I'm going to let Andrew take it away with some election news.
Yes, sir. So the 2020 election was just, 4 weeks away, but it feels like it's dragging on forever.
Yep, 4 weeks ago.
Yeah, 4 weeks away. Yes, we're 4 weeks away from it now. Yeah, 4 weeks back, and it just feels like it's dragging on.
Never gonna end.
Ever.
Yeah.
So yesterday, I actually was in town in Phoenix, Arizona, for an event put on by the by a series of select members from the Arizona GOP who are in the state legislature. They put on a fact-finding session, or kind of an unofficial hearing, to hear the case from the Trump legal team. Now, that would be Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis were both in town providing kind of a broader explanation of what they've seen thus far in terms of affidavits and evidence from what they're alleging for voter fraud in the 2020 presidential election. And then they broke it down further.
Within Arizona.
And some of it was nationwide, just kind of to sort of contextualize the discussion. But most of it was Arizona-based, and it was an attempt to get the members of the Arizona legislature to host a special legislative session in the coming week or so, or 2 weeks, to force a forensic audit of the vote casting machines, or the tabulating machines, the counting machines, and to essentially figure out if there was widespread voter fraud that might change the results of the election here in Arizona. Now, Arizona has, I want to say, 11 electors, so that would be pretty big news. It would change the dynamic quite a bit. And essentially, the claim is that if they can prove widespread enough voter fraud, or at least beyond a reasonable doubt, kind of provide enough evidence that the state can, under the Constitution, recall its electors, reclaim them, and designate them for whoever they please. So yesterday they had that hearing. The case was presented between a variety of technical witnesses who ran statistical regressions of the available data, things like that. And then we had poll observers and polling employees from different locations across Arizona who testified to either just strange behaviors at the polling locations, or outright what they would allege to be fraudulent behavior and kind of conspiratorial behavior. Now, at the end of that event, or I guess in the midst of that event, Doug Ducey sat down with Katie Hobbs, the Democratic Secretary of State in Arizona, and they certified the election results here in Arizona for Joe Biden. They are going to as far as everyone knows, the electors are going to be sent from Arizona to the Electoral College to vote on December 14th for Joe Biden. All 11 votes are going to be for Joe Biden. Now, this legislative session, the special session, could change that if they decide to host one and they do find some fraud. But either way, Trump, the president himself, called in to Jenna Ellis on her cell phone, and she played his audio to the audience yesterday. And a number of things were claimed, a number of things were said, but essentially the three kind of biggest points from the president's statements were that this was, quote, the greatest scam in U.S. history, this election, that he cannot simply, for critics particularly on the conservative side, he said that he cannot stand down and do nothing about this election and just wait it out until 2024 and run again. He said that that's not on the table for him. He is going to fight this one out and see what happens with these electors. And then he lambasted Doug Ducey for certifying the election results. He said on Twitter afterwards, "Why is he rushing," Trump said this, "why is he rushing to put a Democrat in office, especially when so many horrible things concerning voter fraud are being revealed at the hearing going on right now?" He then added OANN, conservative news source, and said, "What is going on with Doug Ducey? Republicans will long remember this." He also retweeted a tweet that said that Doug Ducey had betrayed the people of Arizona. Now, so it was a lot of allegations made yesterday, a lot of political theater. Whether you believe that something happened or not, there was certainly some theatricality there.
Without a doubt.
No question. Now, no matter where you come down, though, what I want to ask you guys is, why the rush to certify these results? I mean, we heard from Democrats in 2018 with regard to Brett Kavanaugh. You wrote about this today, Michael, that we needed to hear the evidence. We needed to hear all the claims, that allegations matter. So shouldn't we be hearing the allegations? Why are we seeing a rush to certify the results? And the second question there is also, should someone be punished if there is fraud and the results were certified in a state?
As far as the second question goes, I think the punishment will come. I guess in the broadest sense, I'm not sure what the punishment could be. I'm obviously not a legal scholar, much to my parents' chagrin. I do think that the punishment will come election season. If Ducey did certify something rife with shenanigans, voters aren't going to forget that. I don't know what else as far as like why they seem to be rushing. It is strange because I probably lean more towards I'm sure there was voter fraud, but I don't know if it was wide scale enough to really alter the election. I've always kind of been in that camp. So with that being said, the fact that they are rushing to certify this makes me think a little more like, hey, maybe there was significant, not just some, which I've always thought. Maybe there has been significant voter fraud, maybe enough to swing a state or two. To be clear, I believe even if Arizona flipped from Biden to Trump, that still wouldn't change.
No, it would not change the final national results at all.
Which does make it really strange. Michael, what do you think? Why do you think they're being so hasty about this?
Yeah, well, obviously just pressure from Democrats and mainstream establishment figures. They're all saying that Trump is making all this stuff up, which, we have yet to see all the evidence we need to see on that. But what we have seen so far is really troubling, and it is a lot more votes than I think any of us expected at first. And this stuff just keeps coming out. And at this point, you need to make sure, we need to just finish out all these legal processes before anything is certified. And the fact that they did this is really troubling.
It's certainly strange. It's certainly a bad look. And I think, Brian, to your point, Michael and I have spoken about this with George on the podcast previously, that this is something where I agree. I was one of the most kind of critical of the Trump campaign's legal case immediately. I was like, I necessarily don't agree with the idea that these claims are true. I have not seen enough evidence. And the more claims, the more people who have signed affidavits, at least, those are legally binding when they're submitted to a judge. That person can be, they're under penalty of perjury if they lied. I don't know if I necessarily believe it, but I'm far more willing to look now. I'm more willing to hear out the case. And so I think, to your point, Brian, the idea that we've spoken about before is that whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, the people at home are going to be wanting some heads on spikes, kind of metaphorically speaking, at election season, whether the person, again, is a Republican or a Democrat in the state legislature and in, the governor's house, the secretary of state. If elections were just completely blown, if they were not safe for the American people to go and vote in certain states, no matter whether you support the president in, the governor's mansion or not, you are going to be held responsible by the voters for blowing this election in terms of processes. And so I think that maybe the rush to certify there is part of that. It's the idea that they want to avoid things being discovered and them having to pay for it come election season for what was done wrong in their state. But from that, I want to ask as well, from what you've seen of kind of and we got into this a little bit, what we've seen in terms of evidence and what we've seen more so in the courtroom, because I don't necessarily know if the call from President Trump helped yesterday. I think that, it interrupted a witness testifying before the committee or before the unofficial committee. And so I think that it was an interruption, and it's not the best look for the president to call in and foam off at the mouth during an essentially an unofficial legislative hearing. But what do you guys think? Do you think that minds are going to be changed from kind of more moderate voices or more establishment folks to Trump's side based on these hearings?
I don't know if necessarily they'll go to Trump's side for whatever that might be. I do believe that, like we've just mentioned, you and I at least, who knows with Michael here, but you and I at least have had our minds changed a little bit, at least much more open-minded to the idea that, hey, something nefarious may have happened. and we should absolutely do our due diligence to dig into it.
Mm-hmm.
As far as Trump calling into that hearing, I will say there is a part of me that feels like all of this might be, I'm not sure what the word I'm looking for here, maybe more effective without some of the theatrics, whether it's Giuliani, making some pretty bold claims, just let the legal process play itself out. Like take the affidavits, take the eyewitness testimonials, take them to court instead of, correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, because you were there, but I do believe the session yesterday had no actual like legal basis, right? It was it was an attempt to convince
other legislators
to take up that fight.
Yeah, essentially what had happened there, and Michael, I want to get your opinion in as well, but so essentially what had happened was the idea was that they were going to bring this case before the legislature, and even Republicans on the legislature, who they controlled the Arizona state legislature, were like, I said nothing about this, and I'm not going to be hosting this.
Yeah.
I don't see this being brought before the floor of a state legislature and changing any minds, is what a lot of Arizona legislators said. And so several of them who did believe that things at least needed to be heard sat down and heard that case yesterday in an attempt to essentially get some news coverage for it and to bring to their colleagues the notes from that meeting to encourage an actual official version of what happened yesterday, essentially.
Yeah, another aspect of this that we shouldn't let get lost is the fact that a lot of this process is getting lost on the public because they don't really care about all the legal mumbo jumbo going on and just put aside the specifics of a lot of the claims that Trump made. Him doing things like that, him calling into that hearing, it brings attention to it and it gets people involved in their. And a lot of his base that wouldn't really know what's going on, they look into it more. So does that make it worthwhile that he did it? I don't know, but there is another side. There is a benefit to a lot of Trump's theatrics. That
Certainly,
he does.
I guess the worry is just that whether it will impact the actual political bodies and the political figures and individuals kind of operating at the state level, whether it will change their minds, whether it will make them operate in such a way that maybe things will change in the electoral results that we have so far.
Yeah, I do think big picture, it does kind of worry me a little bit that, the GOP governors who seem like Ducey, for instance, who seem so eager to who was eager and certified the results, I'm always opposed to putting anyone on a pedestal, whether or not it's a president however effective as Trump has been. But I do think there's something to maybe not necessarily a party line, but party unity. And this honestly shouldn't be a party issue. Imagine if the shoe was flipped and it was Biden's camp who wanted this. Like, if they presented the same evidence Team Trump is presenting right now, I would think they're being sore losers, yes, but I would also be like, look into it.
Yeah.
Like, there's no reason. Yeah, there's no reason to rush into a certification. There's no reason to jump to conclusions. If the final margin, and like I mentioned earlier, like even if Arizona somehow flipped, I don't know if you can decertify results or whatever, but even if somehow Arizona flipped, it wouldn't be enough for Trump alone. So with that being the case, it is so bizarre that, the classic never Trumpers are so eager to just it doesn't matter. Like, listen, even if Trump flips Arizona, Biden will still have more than 270 electoral votes he needs. Let's take a minute and look into potential fraud. That is, like, there's nothing more destructive to democracy than people not believing in a free and fair election. Why not put some of those fears to rest in a state that, even if it were to flip, wouldn't ultimately make a difference in the election? Like, what is the rush? That's a very good question, Andrew, and I wish I had a better answer. Alas, the conspiracy theorist in me does think, maybe something is going on there. Maybe something is going on there. Speaking of things going on, I don't know if you guys noticed, we have a wonderful Christmas set. We did, however, skip right over a Thanksgiving theme set here for reasons I don't know. I think Thanksgiving is the vastly superior holiday to Christmas.
I mean, I think they should have just been forced to listen to the chomping of food.
Let's not start with that. I'm hungry. Anyways, speaking of chomping of food, guys, One thing I want to talk about today is the utter hypocrisy, just the lunacy, the cowardice, the how despicable I find it that we have politicians right now who are mandating these restaurants to be closed. Essentially, they're ruining businesses, and yet they can't be bothered to follow their own guidelines. I mean, what does that say? Like, I would still vehemently disagree with politicians if they wanted to close the restaurants, but they at least, stayed in their house and adhered to their own rules. That's one thing.
Right.
I would disagree with them, but I would respect the stance. I have no respect for some of the stuff that's been going on in California lately, which is my former state of residence and brings me endless sorrow to see what that place has become. So a few weeks ago, Gavin Newsom, had just put out a new mandate. Got to close the restaurants, can't have people there. And he was caught maskless at a fancy restaurant.
French Laundry.
Yeah, that, the average person wouldn't even dream of being able to afford right now. More recently, we have Los Angeles County Supervisor Sheila Kuhl? Apologies for mispronouncing that. She voted to ban in-person dining and, surprise, surprise, was at a restaurant in-person dining. It just blows my mind. Like, there's a part of me, again, I completely disagree, but I do understand the everyday folks who are genuinely afraid of COVID and agree with, hey, let's close restaurants, let's do this, that. That's fine. As a citizen, you are more than entitled to those fears.
Yes.
As a politician actually enacting policy, it is beyond despicable. They are the scum of the earth to force these businesses, many of whom may never recover, to force them to close because you want to make it seem like it's the right thing to do, but then you can't be bothered to do that right thing. Like, come on. That is just obscene to me. So I guess my first question, I'll throw it to you guys so I can stop ranting for a minute. Why, like, what is the end game here? Like, why... they are doing some there's countless reports of long-term damage being done to restaurants, small businesses alike, even some big businesses. Like, I know theater chains are really hurting right now.
Yeah.
What is the end game here? Like, why are these? Because these governors clearly don't believe that it stops the spread of coronavirus. If they truly believe that, they wouldn't be being caught doing these stupid things. So what is the real end game here that you guys think they're up to?
I mean, I think, and I very much do not agree with the folks who have been kind of calling this, the plandemic. It's this worldwide global conspiracy by the elites to kind of gain more political power. But I absolutely categorically agree with the idea that this is in some ways a power play, even if it is kind of subconscious. I mean, your political class wants power. They have money. They have influence. They have lots of friends who get to dress nicely and go to restaurants and have these kind of cocktail dinners and do their thing. And the idea that they get to tell people what to do while they're doing it is, I mean, that's just, it's pie in the sky. It's the most amazing thing that they could possibly imagine. So I think the end game for them subconsciously is just that they get to be a moral hero fighting for something.
Yes.
They get to have their cake and eat it too. They get to go to French Laundry and have a $100 per plate meal, on the taxpayer's dime, whether it's written off or not. They are paid by the taxpayer.
Yep.
So the taxpayer is in some ways, at some point down the line, footing the bill for that meal, unless they were fabulously wealthy prior to taking office. So it's power and it's elitism.
And this was shocking when I believe we talked about Newsom on the show a few weeks ago and what he did. But it blows my mind that so many more politicians are getting caught doing this. Cool, Newsom. I believe there were a few others back when Newsom got caught. And then now
Jose, right?
Yeah, the San Jose mayor, Sam Liccardo, had to apologize on Twitter today for gathering for Thanksgiving with his family, contrary to the rules that he was supposed to be putting out.
And part of that, unfortunately, I will lay that problem at the hands of the Trump administration, or the kind of the cult of personality around Trump, is that we have seen, particularly in the last 4 years, and this wasn't, it wasn't him that introduced it, but he certainly has exacerbated it, is this idea that everything's on video. So either politics was going to go one of two ways in the modern era with video. It was going to go the way of your career was over when you were a hypocrite like this because the evidence was on the table.
Yeah.
Or it was going to go the way of everyone forgets 5 minutes from now when you say, I never did that, or I'm sorry. So unfortunately, I think because of the last 4 years of hearing either I didn't do that from the president or I'm so sorry from Democrats who aren't sorry, is that now there is no shame in politics. And you know what? There's no shame in there being shame in the system because people should be ashamed of bad behavior and they should be ashamed of taking advantage of the American people and they should be held accountable.
Yeah, they should be. I agree with you to a certain extent. I will say, to give Trump credit, at the very least, like when it comes to lockdowns, he's always been opposed. Like, I mean, obviously when things got really bad, in like end of March-ish, we had to enforce national lockdown. But now it does feel like, Trump is definitely preoccupied with
the election
fraud, which I totally understand. Like I said earlier, that's worth looking into. So now that responsibility really falls on locally elected officials, and to see them drop the ball in such a way where, and it genuinely it upsets me to see officials in one moment say, "Oh, like we're for you, we're for the people,"
of course,
and then when Mama Luigi, or not Mama, I guess it'd be Papa Luigi's, local eatery gets shut down because of COVID, they basically just shrug their shoulders, like you said. Yeah. And Michael, do you think some of these places can rebound? I know that it looks grim, but do you think that some of these places, Papa Luigi's eatery or, the local deli joint that Andrew will be all
making me
snobbish
hungry.
about.
Yes.
Like, do you think they can rebound? Like, do you think they'll ever come back? And what would that kind of look like, do you think?
I mean, some will and some won't. We've already seen plenty of cases where places have had to shut down, businesses have had to go under. So a lot of the damage has already been done. Has already been done. We already know that a lot of these businesses just won't come back. And we know that, we have complete, utter, irrefutable evidence that happens to small businesses.
Yeah.
And we don't have any evidence that the lockdowns actually save lives. Yeah. So that's just another little thing to add to the whole hypocrisy that, these politicians keep pushing for this stuff. They clearly don't believe it because they won't follow their own rules, and yet they're going to push it anyway and ruin all these people's businesses and lives and stuff. So,
not to mention on that count, it's the same left that has attacked large corporations for decades is now bolstering Amazon and Google and Apple, companies that don't have to shut down during all this while they destroy mom and pop shops on Main Street. I mean, the hypocrisy is borderline endless on this topic.
And speaking of Google and social media hypocrisy, so. We all know that fact checkers and the whole fact checking process on Facebook and Twitter is just hypocritical. It's just left-wing voices getting to censor right-wing opinions, and they never really do it to their own side. So PolitiFact, I think about a week ago, censored a Candace Owens tweet where she basically just stated that Joe Biden is not the president-elect of the United States, which is completely true. And yet PolitiFact put a false rating on her, I believe, her tweet. So Candace Owens appealed that. She got basically, PolitiFact just said, oh, yeah, we were wrong. I guess we'll take it off, which is just ridiculous that they have the power to just do that if they're completely wrong. No consequences. So that was a big win for conservatives. Candace Owens got PolitiFact to back off. But also, about 2 weeks ago, Owens announced that she's putting together this really, high-powered team of lawyers to go after Facebook fact checkers for defamation suits. Basically saying, you keep fact-checking my opinions as false, and you're not doing this fairly to the other side, and you're just defaming my character. You're saying that I'm lying about everything when really these are just opinions, or maybe you're just selectively choosing. We all know how these fact checks have worked. They've tried to pull quite a few things on the Western Journal before.
One or two.
Yeah. Maybe a couple of times. So I just wanted to ask you guys, so this is this is a pretty big deal. What Candace Owens, she got a big win against PolitiFact. She's putting together a team of lawyers to go after Facebook fact checkers. Do you guys think that this is kind of the beginning of the end for fact checkers? That they might always be around, but they're not going to have the same level of power that they do now. Because until this example, we haven't really seen this much fighting back. This much of conservatives fighting it back against these fact checkers.
I don't think it's the beginning of the end, unfortunately. I do think that what Candace Owens is doing is great in the sense that, as a trio of comic book nerds, we've all heard who watches the Watchmen, or
Yes.
who fact checks the fact checkers.
Yep.
Which, without going into fact checkception, the idea that you have to continue to do that is kind of absurd, but almost necessary at this point because of how weaponized the left has made fact checking. Like Candace Owens mentions, it's not about who said what in terms of what's actually factually correct. It's kind of boiled down to what conservative opinion can we try to take down? It's become that. It's not fact checking in the most literal of senses anymore. It is this conservative person said this thing. Here's one little angle of it that's disputable. False.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what it's become. I do think there is something to be said where I feel like there's a lot of things that conservatives kind of just ignored during the culture wars, like kind of, earlier this millennium in the 2000s. Yeah. I'm a lot older than both these guys. So it does feel like there's a lot of stuff that conservatives kind of let, they didn't think it was worth fighting over. And a lot of pop culture stuff. That's why leftism is so pervasive in pop culture. And I do wish, and it feels like very quietly, leftists kind of hijacked the idea of fact checking.
Yes.
And it just, I wish conservatives would have done a better job kind of not letting that get away from them, because that has become a very potent weapon for the left.
Yeah, it's become like a contextualization game where you can contextualize out your opponent's idea. It's just, instead of, it used to be, at least from what I remember, thumbing through newspapers when I was too young to read them, it was, a claim about a number of something, like a number of vaccine doses or a number of troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. And, so-and-so said something on the campaign trail to that effect. And they were like, well, actually, no, this is how it went down. Or, no, this is what the actual number is.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a fact check. Now it's a page-long article about, well, maybe the claim isn't necessarily wrong, but this is mildly racially insensitive, so kind of just a roundabout dispute through context, but not disputing the actual fact of the matter. It's not fact-checking at all.
And then labeled false.
Yes.
Based on that.
And so I think, to your point, Michael, or to your question, I guess, is it's not the beginning of the end for fact-checking, but I think it's certainly going to, if Candace Owens can see success with these lawsuits, it is the beginning of the end of their influence. Because I've said this a couple times on the show, and I still believe this to be true. I think, unfortunately, the trick of the trade in news is to run the most bold headline imaginable as big as possible, and to run any retraction or update as small as possible in the margins tomorrow. And so I think unless we get this big headline of, Candace Owens defeats fact checkers, here's what happened, they're not going down.
And I think one of the biggest problems with this whole thing that we haven't mentioned yet is that they claim to be independent fact checkers. And that's what I'm talking about, is the independent fact checkers that places like Facebook and Twitter call in, and then they're supposed to give these neutral, unbiased fact checks, when in reality, it's just like you talked about, it's just playing all these different games and contextualization stuff. So,
I do think one thing tying this a little bit back to what Andrew talked about earlier with like Trump's kind of theatrics, I do think one really big benefit of just the Trump brand, whatever that encompasses, is sort of like it really exposes these fact checkers, these leftists,
Yes.
and how kind of loony they really are. I mean, I may have just not seen them before, but I swear I don't remember seeing as many partially false
Yep.
fact checks
Yeah.
as I have in recent
Yeah.
times, where, I'm sorry, but a fact is either
Yeah.
fact or false.
Yeah.
Like it's there's not really a gray area if we're just
Yeah.
talking facts, and seeing them kind of go to these lengths.
Yeah.
I am appreciative that Trump has helped sort of expose these leftists, these far leftists, and especially when it comes to something like, especially like Twitter, seeing like basically Trump basically can't tweet right now without
Yeah.
getting this fact is
A tag.
disputed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And again, that's another thing. This fact is disputed. So we're not saying it's false. We're
Yeah.
just saying it's
Yeah.
disputed. Like,
Like-
what does that mean? Come on.
It's beyond parody at this point. I think in that way you're right. Like Trump is the sword that cuts both ways. Like for
Yep.
every complaint that I have as a more traditional conservative about this president, he has uncovered so many incredibly important things when it comes to the left's control of culture and politics.
He's opened the door
Yes.
for the Republican Party to step through and to finally be able to fight back on
Yes.
cultural grounds,
No
to be able to
question.
fight back against accusations of racism and
Yep.
stuff. I'm sure we all remember back when politicians would just kind of
course.
shy away when they were
Yeah.
called racist.
Of course.
And that's not going to work. And
No.
so he's opened the door. We'll see if Republicans can capitalize on that in the
Yeah.
coming years.
They better.
Yeah.
Gonna need it.
All right, friends. Well, we've covered all today, from election stuff to Thanksgiving to eating to Michael getting really excited about Google.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us. Just as a friendly reminder, in case you haven't noticed while watching us, this is WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. You can catch us every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. To our audio listeners, if you could all do us a huge, huge favor, go ahead and check out youtube.com/WJ Live. Click the subscribe button and hit the bell to be notified when a new podcast goes up. That would be a huge help to us.
Ding.
Oh,
Joe's not
that's
here.
still a thing. Okay, I just took a week off, and apparently that ding is still a thing. To those of you who are joining us on YouTube, you can also help us out by going to WJ Live on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you catch your podcasts. Subscribe to us. That would be a big help. Just as big a help if you wouldn't mind leaving us a 5-star review. And finally, if you are really interested in supporting us and real journalism and helping us equip you, the viewers, with the truth, you can go to westernjournal.com/join, and you can actually subscribe to us and basically help us continue to do what we do, fight the good fight, and not let big tech fact checkers sway things that aren't really facts. Thank you so much, guys. Have a wonderful day.
Like you, who want the unvarnished truth that the establishment media won't tell you. Our multi-tiered plans give you exactly what you want and help us fight fake news during this, the most important election of our lives. Become a subscriber to the Western Journal today and unlock exclusive features you won't find anywhere else. It's easy. Just follow the prompts in this video to join us in equipping readers with the truth.